Welcome, everybody, to Circle of Fellows, episode number 66. My name is Shel Holtz. I am an IABC Fellow. I am also Director of Internal Communications at Webcor, which is a construction company, a commercial builder headquartered in San Francisco. And I am delighted to be moderating this panel today about going solo, becoming an independent consultant. I've got a great panel with me today. There are 4 independent consultants, people who have taken this step, and one fellow who, like me, is on the client side. Although I did spend 21 years as an independent consultant, I get to participate in both sides of this conversation. Let's go around and do introductions. And normally I just ask who you are and what you do. Today I want to know who you are, what you do, and what your motivation was, or what the rationale was for leaving the corporate world, leaving the client side, and becoming an independent entrepreneurial consultant. I'm going to start with Angela.
Oh, thank you. I'm Angela Sinicus. I have my own firm, Sinicus Communications, Inc., and mostly what we do is survey research work for communication. I actually have 2 stages. I wanted to go into consulting in general because I really like the variety and the things you learn while you're helping people. And so I did that with larger firms for about 13 years. But I went off on my own when I realized the revenue that I was generating all on my own was pretty stable and it was enough to support myself. So that's when I decided to go out on my own 20 years ago, almost 21 years ago.
Great. And let's move on to Marianne.
Good morning. It's Marianne McCauley. I'm in Reno, Nevada, and I began my consulting career out of corporate, actually with a consulting firm that came looking for me when I was in Minneapolis. And the reason I was looking for that kind of a role is I had been laid off as a result of a merger. And I was at an IABC meeting and talking about it, and the late Lou Williams told me I'd be a good consultant. And I asked him why, and he said, because consulting practice likes aggressive broads like you.
That sounds like Lou.
Yeah, so the day he died, he swore he never said it. It was the best advice I ever got. And so I worked for a firm in Minneapolis for 3.5 years and got downsized again through a merger. And at that point, my husband, Gary, said, why don't you go out on your own? He said, if you work as hard for yourself as you do for other people, you can't help but be successful. And so I did 30 years. I'm now executive director of Washoe County Medical Society because I don't want to work as hard as I did as a consultant in this part of my career. And I also still do some consulting. I do strategic planning for nonprofits when they come looking for me.
Great. Amanda.
Good evening. I'm Amanda Hamilton Atwell. I've got a PhD in communication science and ABC and IABC Fellow. And I run also my own business DNA. And like Angela, I started about 21 years ago. Why did I start? For a couple of reasons. Because it was 2000. And it sounded like a good time to go. Because there's a time to come and a time to go. And 2000 sounds like a watershed here. So I decided that I'm going to go on my own, and the organization where I work, the National Productivity Institute, also refocused, and they wanted to put me on projects that really didn't interest me. So I decided, well, if not, why not now?
Very good. And Alice.
I'm Alice Brink. I'm in Houston. I am an independent consultant who focuses on persuasive communications and primarily works in the energy industry. I started out on my own at the end of November 2004 after having had corporate jobs and being with a big PR agency for 8 years. And I discovered I'm really a crummy employee because I want to be the boss. And so So I went out on my own, and the agency owner was kind of happy to see me go. So I have since then, I had one client that hired me in-house for 2 years, and I discovered I'm still a crummy employee, but I'm a pretty decent consultant.
Wonderful. And Tosh.
Hello from Seattle. I'm the anomaly. I am not an independent consultant. I do work for EY as a strategy and performance consultant. I decided to go into consulting from many years of being internal because I had the opportunity to really explore more of the strategic and organizational performance aspect and help various clients really move forward to meet future needs.
Excellent. And I will add that I went independent in 1996. I had been with a human resources consulting firm for a couple of years. I had grown enamored of digital technology in an era where most people weren't talking about it yet. It was the mid-90s. And for one of our clients, the client was Adobe Systems Incorporated. We developed the very first benefits enrollment on an intranet. It was a year before the word intranet was introduced. And we figured we were onto something. And I took it to the leadership of the company on the East Coast and did a presentation. And their answer was, we make money selling shrink wrap software that somebody wrote in Fortran. We're not going to do anything that, using open source that anybody can do. So I quit at the age of 40 with a wife who was staying home and taking care of kids. I said, honey, do you mind if I take a stab at being independent? And went off and initially worked with companies to help them figure out how to incorporate digital technology into their communications, primarily internal, but certainly websites as well. So that's my experience. I'm thinking that somebody is listening over speakers rather than earbuds. So as we go through this, or am I the only one hearing the?
No, I hear it too.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's coming out of somebody's speaker. So in any case, the first question I'd like to throw out there to you is, when you decided that you were going to go independent, how did you find your first clients?
Can I start?
Please.
So I had already decided to go out on my own, but I had been doing a proposal for a client, which was then Anderson Consulting that became Accenture. And I had gotten the project. I was still working at Mercer, but then all of a sudden they called me back and said, oops, we can't hire you. And I said, why? I said, well, because Mercer actually competes with us in one area of our business. So it's a conflict of interest to work with Mercer. And I said, wait, let me understand. You want to work with me, but you can't work with Mercer. They said, yeah. I said, can you hold off on making a decision for a couple of days? And that's the day I gave my notice. So I got my first, and it was completely ethical because there's no way Mercer was going to get work from them. So that was my first client. And I got my second one while I was at the airport going for a meeting there. And I had a client that called and said, we're being acquired by another company. We have all this money that's going to just disappear into the corporate coffers if we don't assign it now. So could you do 2 or 3 years of research work for us? So I started out my first couple of weeks really rich, which is good because the dot-com crash happened 2 months later.
I had a similar experience because when my organization that paid my salary decided to refocus. The one client, they're not going to service provide that service anymore. So I said, well, I am going on my own. Also, if you can wait a month, then I can provide you with a service that I would have provided you with. And they said, no, fine, that's great. And that's how I started. So I also had a first client the day that I walked out.
Anybody else? I know that my first client was Reagan Communications. They wanted me to do a newsletter, actually 2 print newsletters that got distributed to subscribers. One on technology and communications in general, and one on intranets, and that was enough for me to be able to, pay the rent and keep the lights on while I was trying to round up other clients. Alice.
So I did not have a client in hand when I made the leap of faith to go out on my own. But someone else who had recently left the agency that I was at had gone to work for Shell Oil. And so I'd contacted her and just let her know, because I was running the energy practice. I had been running the energy practice at that agency. And she said, well, I'll pass your name around. She says, I'm in a position where I don't get to hire anybody. But, and she called me about 2 months later and said, they've moved me into media relations and my energy media relations skills are rusty. Can I buy you lunch? And by the time we met for lunch, her boss had said, hire her, put her on a retainer. And that was 15 years ago. And I have actually had Shell as a client consistently for that entire time.
That's Shell with 2 L's, not me.
Shell Oil, yes, not Shell Holtz. I seldom have to explain that, but this is one place where I do.
One forum where you do. How, when you became a consultant, did you align your work with what clients needed? And this is where I think we can bring you into the conversation for the first time. What's your experience with clients who are prepared for the kind of work that you are looking to throw out at them?
Yeah, I've actually hired quite a few independents and over some of the big firms. One, because pricing models are much more friendly to the organizations. But I also find that in hiring independents, they're a little bit more creative in their approach, and they're and align more to what the business needs than some of the what I can get from some of the larger consultancies. I think that's the biggest driver.
And for those of you who are the independent consultants, what about making sure that you are aligned with what the client is looking for?
Well, I think, Shell, one of the most important things you do as a consultant, whether you're independent or working for an agency, is don't sign on or offer to do something you're not good at. So you align yourself by being the expert in a particular area and being willing to say, I can't do that, but I know somebody who can. Here's what I do best. And it's also being able to understand the business. We, as communicators, regardless of our role, we need to understand business and the specifics of the businesses that we are going to work with.
Yeah, I think that is very important, that we understand the business that we are going to work with, and also the industry of the business that we're going to work in. And so that onboarding process is very important.
I think it's also continuous. You can't stop learning. And so I have to put in a plug for IABC, because I go to conferences and, listen to things like this, and I'm always trying to learn and find, new, the industry, most of us have been doing this for 15, 20 years, and the technology has changed, industries have changed, environments have changed, priorities have changed. And if you're not paying attention, you quickly become irrelevant.
And then, once you've gotten out there and you've got some work, obviously you would like a steady stream of new business. For me, it was generally getting out there and doing speaking engagements. I would say the vast number of new clients that I got came as a result of speaking. Sometimes that was a long lead time. Somebody would say, I saw you speak a year and a half ago, and now we have a need for that. But also, maintaining my blog and the podcast, and just being out there. Is that similar to what you all have done, or have you had other approaches to bringing in new business?
No, that was really, I did some, not the extent that you did in terms of speaking, but I was active in IABC. And that helped open networks to me, open channels. It didn't necessarily mean the IABC people I was involved with hired me. Some of them did, but they referred me to people who hired me. I was active on boards in the community. That brought business to me. And then that creates a word of mouth that generates business for you. In fact, one time when cash flow wasn't great, I was doing well, but cash flow was terrible. Gary suggested that maybe I not go to the accreditation council meetings because we were paying our own way or doing some of those things. And I went back and looked at the cost of participating in IABC right down to my bar bills. Came back and said, well, return is 7 to 1. And don't stop going to the meeting.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
I'm being present. It's about being present.
Yeah, I'm a terrible marketer, but I'm an awesome networker. And so I just got an annual report project after having lost my big sustainability report client because they got bought. And I'm sitting here with this gap in my spring schedule. And somebody called me and said, hey, I'm going to give your name to so-and-so. Is that okay? And so I have a project now.
Yeah. I joined business organizations as well. As I'm a member of PRISA and of the IABC, and then of a couple of business chambers. And I feel that, if I must look at the income streams from the different associations, because of if you talk to the IABC people, it's more inbreeding, but the business associations is more like in, wow, we really need that. So for me, that is a very good, if you want to network outside the IABC, join business chambers.
Yeah, I think you should decide what kind of business you really want to have too. Because I'm not a generalist, I'm very much a specialist doing research and communication, which most communicators don't do. I needed to have not just a local geography as my base of business, but basically the world. So using something like IABC, I remember going to conferences and I would listen to people who were talking in different languages or had heavy accents from different languages, and I would make sure I joined their circles. And that's how I ended up building an international business. And one of them was a British company that's no longer around, Meldrum. I became a regular columnist for their publication, and that led to all kinds of work in Europe and Australia. So you have to figure out what kind of work you're looking for and put yourself in those places. Sort of like Amanda's talking about different businesses. Also think of those other things that would be the ideal projects for you.
Right. And I do want to point out that if you are watching the panel on YouTube in real time, you can do what Susan did and share a comment right there through YouTube. I'm also monitoring the hashtag COF66 on Twitter, if that's easier for you. But Susan says that being inactive in IABC has helped her land about 80% of her solid long-term clients. We've talked about the IABC affiliation. IABC has areas of focus that are different from, say, PRSA. Is having a niche important when you go out? I mean, your research, right? I did digital technology, although, if somebody said we want an internal communications audit, I was not likely to say no. But what I really
sending them to me.
What I enjoyed and what I wanted to do was work on the digital technologies. I did a mobility audit, for example, for Pepsi. But being out there in that niche, that seemed to help me. Is it important, or is there a place for a good, solid communications generalist?
I think it's tough. Well, I had kind of a few niches. Trade media relations was my biggest niche. That's where I made most of my money. It was the area a lot of my colleagues didn't want to mess with. But I worked with small emerging companies that had no advertising budgets, could go to a trade show, once or twice a year. And I began working in trade media, and I made a lot of money and a lot of good, solid clients. that then evolved into being able to do strategic planning for them when they grew a little bit. So my focus really was media, with a heavy emphasis on trade media, strategic planning, and crisis. I didn't try to be everything to anybody, and the last thing in the world I wanted to do was another newsletter.
I think one role that I know a couple of people who are generalists, the kind of consulting work they tend to get are short-term contracts where they pretty much work for a company, not full-time, for a few months, like someone's on maternity leave or sick leave or something. So that's where a generalist background is really helpful, but I think it's a different kind of work that you end up doing.
Mm-hmm.
I think what is also, even though I have a niche, my niche is more or less research, but then I also do training, but I will also do internal communication, but I will not do it. I will network. And I think that is very important. If you go on your own, to build a network of competent communication professionals that do not necessarily want to have a company, but who want to be in business. So I have a range of networkers that I use more or less on a full-time basis to do publications for me, to do crisis communication for me, to do, all kinds of different things. Even if I get a training program, I will write the training program, but I will use facilitators with a communication background to present the training programs.
Todd, I'm wondering, how did you find the consultants that you ended up working with? Obviously, you go back to ones that you liked working with and hire them over and over again. But for the first time you worked with one, what were the channels you used to identify who would be best? And was the niche important?
Yeah, often through IABC, but also through work that I do in the community, board work, volunteer work, coming into contact with those individuals. I can't remember who made the comment earlier, but being honest about what you can do is really important, and having a strong network. So as contractors are working on various projects, the needs evolve, and so the original communication needs may change. So being able to work with the consultant to either leverage their strengths, their expertise in particular areas, or tap into additional resources to bring them in, either through the contractor that I've hired or my own network.
You talked about finding people through volunteer work. Would that be IABC type volunteer work or unrelated to communications?
Unrelated communications. So I think it was Amanda who said the importance of diversifying your network, not only in communication, also the business area. So a lot of the work that I do, particularly since I've kind of changed from a pure communication focus to more of an organizational performance focus, a lot of my volunteer work is leveraging more the strategy, talent management, talent planning, organizational design, elimination of Lean Six Sigma type work, and so I do engage people with various backgrounds in addition to the communication area.
Right. I know that I've always suggested that people who are looking to get into communications, not necessarily freelancing or being an independent consultant, but looking to move into the profession for the first time, building a portfolio that you've been able to develop in a volunteer organization. There are many of them that sorely need help with communications, and being able to show a portfolio that you've done for an American Heart Association or an organization like that. I know I did a lot of volunteer work. It was in the early 90s, I think, with AIDS Project Los Angeles. Not that I needed the portfolio by then. I was also at Mercer. That was the same time you were at Mercer, Angela. But does volunteer work factor into what those of you who are independent consultants are doing?
I have done a lot of volunteer work. I will say I don't think I've gotten jobs from it because I haven't chosen volunteer work that feeds that sort of thing. I mean, I work with the National Alliance on Mental Illness, and it's very much, families in crisis, and that's not a good place to go look for clients for public relations.
Yeah, sorry you're going through this. Can I give you my card?
Yeah, exactly. Right. It's like awkward. But I did do media training for their staff and volunteers, and that added to my portfolio. And I was board chair and did strategic planning, and that added to my portfolio. So I think it worked that way.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's talk about money for a little bit. When I went out on my own, I had been working for a consulting firm. And if I had to travel somewhere, they had a booking agent and everything got charged elsewhere. I didn't have to come up with that money. When I went out on my own, suddenly I was relying on my own bank account for any expenses that usually preceded payment by a client. How do you prepare yourself financially to go into this line of work?
I built a war chest. I knew that this layoff was coming because not only, was a merger in process, but like Alice, I wasn't a good employee because I challenged my bosses on a regular basis. And not to sound like I'm hurting myself, patting myself on the back, but I was right most of the time. And one of the two women who owned the firm I worked for in Minneapolis really didn't like that very much. So I knew I'd be one of the first to go when that happened. And I did two things. We watched what we were spending, but I also took advantage of one of those credit card deals. I had a credit card that had a $10,000 limit on it. And so when I went out on my own, I could afford to buy my first Apple computer and a printer. And I never did run that to the max because I got enough business to fund things. I also was married to somebody who squirreled money away, like in his sock drawer. He wasn't hiding it from me, but it was just something he did. So there was always a little cash around. But you do have to plan to be, serious. You've got to look at what it costs to be in business. And you have to have a responsible business model, because you may be the greatest consultant in the world, but if you can't get your invoices out on time, if you can't fund the travel you need to do, you're not going to succeed.
Right. When I went out on my own, I thought that everything was going to be virtual. I'm working with organizations on digital technology. We'll do everything digitally. And it was important for me to be home. Another reason I did this was that my wife had a spinal fusion, and we still had young kids in the house. And I wanted to be around to help. And I thought, wow, doing work remotely with my clients who have brought me on board to help them go digital is going to provide me with that opportunity. And boy, was I wrong. Yes, we need you to come out and meet with us. So I was not prepared for that because it was not one of the things that I had expected. Mm-hmm. One of the best pieces of advice I got as I was going through this cash flow issue was from Charles Pizzo, former chairman of IABC, who said, bill your clients half up front. Mm-hmm. Right?
Yeah, I do it in thirds for a big survey project. 1/3 upon the contract basically being signed, 1 when the survey goes live, and then the final piece when all the reports are in. But yeah, that really helps, because especially I've got one client that pays on a 90-day basis. It's a huge organization. Yeah. That's horrible.
Yeah. Yeah. It seems as if huge organizations are huge because of that.
Yeah, what they're doing is they're holding that money for 90 days. It's not theirs technically; they owe it to you, but they're going to collect the bank interest on that money for 90 days. So they're going to make money on what they owe you. And I know when I was, I couldn't do this so much when I was at Allergan, but when I was at Mattel, because I knew my vendors were not the kind that were billing every month. And, after the first 90 days, they were getting a monthly paycheck. these were people who did one small project, might be an independent graphic designer, for example. They couldn't wait 90 days. So I walked their invoice over to accounts payable and said, I need this paid much sooner than that. And because I'd built the relationship with accounts payable, they did it. I don't know, Todd, do you find that there are issues with consultants who are not able to really accommodate the payment schedule of a big company? And EY is no small organization.
Yeah, I've never run into any situations where the consultant has had to put some pressure on collecting, but I do know that even my clients sometimes take longer than the 90 days that EY has put in their contracts. But yeah, no, I have not experienced that at all.
Yeah, it was explained to me when I was at Arco, which I think had 60 days, and I left Arco in 1983, I think. And what they said was, if you have an oil field services contract and it's $2 million a month and it's $2 million every single month, yeah, you put them on 60 days. And as soon as that kicks in, they've got a steady cash flow. But the independent graphic designer who's doing a one-time project obviously is not in that boat. What about contracts? I had a letter of agreement that I used with my clients. It was a one-pager that simply said, here's what I'm doing for you. And here's what the arrangement is in terms of payment. And what my requirements are for you and what your requirements are for me. It was always fit on one page, but then every now and then I would get, this is quaint. We have this 12-page contract that all our vendors have to sign. What's your experience with letters of agreement and contracts?
Yeah, on my end, if they send me an email saying they accept the proposal, I'm good. But there are a lot of these clients, and it's not just the contract, it's sometimes what's included in the contract. I've had to go out and get special riders on insurance programs for things that they are requiring, like in case I get injured on their premises, even though I'm never going to even be on their premises. So that is an issue. And again, it's the larger firms. But the nice thing about the larger firms is you never have to worry about eventually getting paid. It may take a while, but you don't have to chase them down to get paid.
Yeah. Well, I had to get a certificate for electricity wiring for one company. I ask you, what do I have to do with electricity? But for me, it all depends. Some organizations prefer the one-pager. Universities, I found, prefer a long, detailed, like in research proposal that you will write for a dissertation. So everything must be detailed. And if you do a tender for a government department, 62 pages will be what you have to deliver.
Mm-hmm.
I've had various kinds of contracts. I just, with this new client, had to sign a contract. But one of the things I do is I look at the payment terms in the contract, and I will request a change if it says more than 30 days. This last contract, I read it thoroughly, and I found an error somewhere in the boilerplate of the contract and just marked it through and corrected it. And I let them know. I said, hey, I redlined something, but other than that, the contract's fine. And they said, oh my gosh, nobody's ever noticed that. You must be a good proofreader. But I have, I will push back if the contract says more than 30 days and try and negotiate that up front. And I have done that with some of my very large clients I have had.
The other thing you need to negotiate is intellectual capital or intellectual property, who owns it, because sometimes they're saying, oh, they're going to own everything that you do. But if it's based on something you've already copyrighted, that has to be really clarified.
I do that agreement as well. Yeah. And mine was about a page and a half. And I billed my clients on a monthly basis. And I told them I'd bill them on a monthly basis. And I usually would say it won't exceed, kind of based on the budget proposal, X much without a phone call. Mm-hmm. And that worked. I also deliberately did not work with very many big companies because my experience with the big companies wasn't just the contractors. They already knew what they wanted you to do. So you were often asked, in my opinion, that's why I made a bad boss or made a bad employee, implementing somebody's bad strategies. And I didn't want to go there. I liked to work with companies. That's part of the niche we talked about earlier. I like to work with the companies where I have direct access to the founder. And I didn't have trouble collecting on any of those.
I had a number of clients, and as you've all pointed out, these tend to be the larger organizations that had errors and omission insurance, E&O. And I was usually able to get an exclusion from that by pointing out that nothing I am going to do is going to cause a building to fall down or a product to fail. It's not that kind of work, right? But there were a few that were immovable. That sorry, this is our contract. And one, it was so valuable a contract that I went ahead and spent, I think, $500 for 1 year for E&O insurance. But other than that one time, I excused myself. I said, well, it's been wonderful talking to you. Maybe I can point you to another consultant.
Yeah.
I think that brings up another good point to talk about, Shell, and that's following your gut, and don't take business because you think you need it or you think that client would look good on your resume, because you get in trouble if you do. At least I did. You know, don't take people who call you out of the yellow pages. It's kind of my theory.
I knew a guy when I was at Mercer he was a defined contribution consultant, and he could turn business with a cold call, randomly picking somebody out of the yellow pages. It was amazing. Another element of the contract, and Todd, I'm going to bring you into the conversation here, usually addresses the scope of the project. And the scope frequently has a tendency to creep. Todd, have you ever had an experience where a consultant came back to you and said, the bill is going to be more than what we talked about because the nature of the project expanded beyond its original scope?
Yeah, I usually include language in the original statement of work that accounts for potential scope increase. And so I think, what I find very helpful is to have a very concise, specific list of the work and the deliverables, something that you can refer to quickly instead of having to process through a lengthy contract to figure out what is it that the consultant is on the hook for. So in addition to the contracts, even with my clients, I'll usually create just kind of a one-page, here's what I understand the work to be and the deliverables associated with that work, so that even on a weekly basis, I can refer back to here's what we've accomplished, or here's the progress we are, or the status of the work in play. So it just makes it easier to manage when there is if there's any shift in the scope, it shouldn't be a surprise because you're having that conversation on a regular basis.
Right. I want to throw in another comment from Susan to you, Marianne, saying my only deadbeat clients, two of them, were those who found me online, not through networking relationships.
Yeah, she's absolutely right.
Yeah. But going back to the scope question, in my letter of agreement, I always said that I will notify you if the work that you're asking me to do exceeds the scope and get your approval before I go ahead and do that work. Do you all have similar language in your contracts or letters of agreement?
Yeah, like for the survey, one of my assumptions is always how many questions might be in the survey. Well, you don't know until you develop it. But as we're going through the revisions, I'll say, now, we've exceeded the 100 questions that were in the proposal. Do you want to cut some back, or do you actually want all these questions and then pay more? So it's their choice.
But I also negotiate any changes before I do the work, because otherwise you might end up doing all the work and they say, but sorry, we didn't budget for this. So next time we do a project with you, we will include that.
Well, and I include some specifics in my contracts. A lot of them are writing. And so I will say, this includes this many rounds of revisions and those sorts of things, so that, and I will often send them kind of a little spreadsheet, and it says, this is what it looks like I think I'm going to be doing.
Yeah, I had a situation with one client where the contract said there's 3 rounds of revisions built into this, and there must have been 20.
Yeah.
And yet they resisted any additional billing based on that. But they were sending it around to other departments, and they'd come back, oh, we have some revisions from this department. And I go, okay, this is like the 9th.
Yeah.
Oh, but they're not that many, right? Well, still time.
Yeah, they are. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, it's a lot of it depends on the rapport and relationship you build with a client over time. I have found that the clients that I've had for years and years, we have a great relationship and an ability to be flexible for each other. They may say, oh, we thought the deadline was going to be 2 weeks from now. It's been moved up to next week. Can you, stay up all night or whatever? And I can do that. And on the other hand, if I, am in a deep freeze in Texas and have no power, they're willing to listen to, okay, can I have a couple extra days?
Yeah.
Yeah, we should note that we're lucky that Alice is with us today. When did you get your power back?
10 o'clock last night.
Oh, very glad you did. There's still lots without it, I understand.
Yes. Yeah. Well, it's down. It was 1.5 million people a couple days ago, and now I saw this morning it's 47,000 or so.
Oh,
so it's big improvement.
Yeah. Todd, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was going to share that where I found a lot of scope creep or even shift in work is where a client will come and say, this is what we want, period. And so by asking the question, help me understand what is the key business challenge that you're trying to address, the key business problem that you're trying to resolve. I can then come back and say, so what you're asking for is really not going to help you in this situation. So it kind of sets the stage up front that don't come in with the solution in mind. Let's figure out what's the right solution for the business opportunity that you have in front of you.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I think that sounds like more pure consulting. In fact, right now, working internally, I face the same things I did when I was working internally before I went out on my own in 1996. And that is people coming to me saying, in the early days, I need a brochure. Today, it's I need a microsite or I need an app, right? And it's, well, wait a second. What are you trying to accomplish?
Right.
In fact, I remember, I think it was Sears' internal communications department way back when Ron Culp was running it, and Sears was still a profitable enterprise. The homepage of the internal communications department on the intranet was an intake form saying, what problem are you trying to solve? Who's your audience? So it was essentially the introduction to a consulting engagement that stopped them from saying, I'm here for a brochure or I'm here for a video or what have you.
Now, my favorite question in that scenario is, what do you want to have happen?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I asked that by accident one time, and it turned out to be my favorite question.
What's the outcome, right?
Yeah. What do you want to have happen? I think that's another topic, Shell, we ought to put on the circle calendar for future. That's training your clients, whether they're internal or external, because it's about that rapport thing that Alice was talking about. And with the consulting business, it may be teaching your clients not to call you at 9 o'clock on Sunday night unless it's really urgent, or giving you extra time when your power's out, or things like that. But it's how to have a good relationship with people so fewer of them come to you and say, I want an app, I want a brochure, I want a thing.
I think the other thing we need to do is make sure that we are showing our appreciation to the clients who treat us well.
Mm-hmm.
I do have a client who is more worried about how quickly I'm going to get paid than I am, and like I will jump through hoops for that client. And, I will drop everything when she calls.
What I also find is, Alice, that, there's showing appreciation for your client. To follow your client, say they resign and they go to a different organization, to follow them there and to ask them to introduce you to the person that's going to step into their role. Because if you have a good relationship with them, they will also make sure that the person that's taking over from them knows who you are, what you are, and the services that you deliver. And that makes it much easier to have this continuous flow of work from a company.
Yeah.
And then another new company, because this person is going into a new company.
Yeah, I've had clients that I've followed from company to company, and this happens to be one of them. And I have other clients where the personnel have changed over time, like almost 100%, and I've managed to maintain, connections and relationships and keep working with them.
Yeah.
Going back to money, I had two interesting experiences. One, at one point, I had several clients who were on retainers. So I got a fixed amount of money from them every month in exchange for a fixed number of hours. They generally used it, but I had one client who just kept paying, and I kept calling and saying, "Do you have anything for me to do? You've paid." The hours didn't expire at the end of the month. So, if say they were buying 10 hours and they didn't use me for 3 months, suddenly I owed them 30 hours of work, which they came to me and said, well, we're not using you that much anymore for reasons A, B, and C, but we'd love to get those 30 hours. And they hit me with the other one. And I'd be willing to bet some of you have had this experience. They said, we don't have this work ready for you now. It'll be next year. We're toward the end of the year, but I have this budget that I have to spend, or I'm going to lose it in my budget next year. So I want to pay you the entire fee before the end of the year. Right. And this has happened to me 3 or 4 times. One time that it was troubling was when I never heard back from them. And I called, and it turned out the person who had contracted with me had left in a reorganization. Her number 2 person said, yeah, I know who you are. I know about that contract. We do want that work done, but we're going through this reorg, and now's not a good time. 2 months later, I called back. He was gone, and nobody knows who I am. I said, well, can I at least give you this money back? And they called their finance department. They said, no, we don't have a way to account for returning money to a consultant, especially from the previous year.
Oh, too bad.
So what do you think is due diligence? What do you think is enough effort on the part of a consultant to be fair to a client who has paid you and not gotten the work?
Mm-hmm.
I think what you did sounds like exactly the right thing. I do very little retainer work because a lot of my clients just want me to be available, and they may have a lot of needs 1 month and then no needs for 6 months. And so I just, I bill by the hour. Anybody asks me, I say I bill by the hour. And so I haven't run into those kinds of things, but I think you do what you think is ethical.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I don't bill by the hour. I don't bill by retainer. I bill by projects. So it's that's a little different too.
Yeah,
I was going to ask, among you, who bills by the hour? Alice, Marianne? I hated billing by the hour. I would do it occasionally. If somebody said, we're in the midst of a crisis, I'd like an hour of your time, I was fine to bill them my hourly rate. But I was much happier with project fees.
Well, I wouldn't mind project fees. Most of the things I do don't really fit into that category. But what I found was, with 8 years in an agency, my impression was that the agency tended to take real advantage of retainer clients.
Mm-hmm.
And I did not want to find myself in that situation. And I just said, I'm going to bill by the hour. If it takes more than time, I'll let you know. If it takes less time, you save money.
Yeah. I found the same thing.
I charge a high rate
Mhm.
because I've got the expertise I'm bringing to it.
Yeah. Yeah. I found the retainer clients of my colleagues when I had business partners, as well as the agency we worked for initially, you either underserved or overserved the client.
I want to talk about. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Amanda.
No, that's why I like Angela said, I like a project, and we cost a project, and we do a project, and we get paid for a project, also in different stages.
Right. Yeah, I want to. We've got about 10 minutes left, and I do want to talk about bad clients. And Todd, I'm not going to suggest that you're a bad client, but what do you do as the client to maintain a good relationship with good consultants? I mean, is there anything that you have to be consciously thinking about in terms of that relationship on the client end?
Yeah, I'd say the number one thing is to make sure that I'm providing the time that the consultant needs. And so I'll generally schedule like a 1 hour, it's a consistent 1 hour every week to touch base. But then whenever there's an issue and the consultant says, I really need to talk to you about this, or I need your help on this, I need to be available. And then it's also, I'm their advocate. So if they need something from another department or anyone else within the organization that I don't say, well, go track this person down. I actually help make that connection and help them collect whatever information or contacts that they need.
And have you ever had to fire a consultant?
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Without naming names or doing anything that would identify who that was, broadly speaking, what were they failing at?
Unfortunately, quality of work. So they would meet the deliverables, but the quality of the content just wasn't there.
Right. What about the independent consultants on the panel? Have you ever fired a client, and what was it over?
I fired a client once. It was it was a referral, oddly enough, but the people came to me for media relations work and weren't honest with me. What they really wanted was to be in the Wall Street Journal. And they were a company that was never going to get in the Wall Street Journal. They were too small, they were technology, and they were not publicly held. But it was one of those things where somebody's brother-in-law worked at the Washington Post and told them they could get in the Wall Street Journal. And they wouldn't listen to me. So I fired them because they hired me to give them the best advice, and their best advice was some really good trade outlets at the time. And they wanted to be in the Wall Street Journal. So I said, well, if you can find somebody that'll get you in the Wall Street Journal, fine. I think they went to an organization in Minneapolis at the time that was called Media Relations. And you paid them by the placement.
Oh,
They didn't get the Wall Street Journal anyway. They tried them as well.
Yeah, I've definitely had clients who said, we want to be on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. My answer would be, how are you going to do that?
Yeah.
Yeah. What's the news?
I haven't, since I've been on my own, I haven't fired any clients, but sometimes in the proposal process, you can tell it's going to be a little tricky, like it's too many people on the review process or something. So you do either of two things. Either you price yourself so high that you know you're not going to get the work, but you've maintained a positive relationship with them because you at least responded to the proposal, or because you are charging so much, it's going to pay for the pain you're going to go through.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Angela, we talk about the Prozac premium. Like for the projects.
I like that.
I'm going to write that down.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. I had two experiences. One was at Mercer.
I wanted to fire a Mercer client myself.
Yeah, this was one where when we finally, we didn't fire them, but we did not seek the work again the next year. And it turned out that we were the last HR consulting firm they had worked with because every other one had decided we're not working with them again.
Oh.
it was bad. They were calling the receptionist at 11 o'clock at night at her home, having tracked down her number to say, where the hell is whichever consultant they were looking for,
Oh,
you know.
no.
It actually reduced her to tears at one time.
Oh, no.
My other experience, though, when I was on my own, I got this gig with a company, and the contact that I worked with was a wonderful guy. He's the one who brought me in. I didn't meet his boss until afterwards, and he was a terror. And I mean, just mean and nasty and sarcastic. And when that project ended and he said, I want to start on phase 2, I said, I'm sorry, no. I like working with you. You're a nice guy. I'm not working with your boss anymore. Sorry. And he completely understood, as it turned out.
Yeah.
Now, I've had a couple situations where I went to the client with the idea that I might lose them because of things I heard that some of their partners were doing that were not ethical. And I skated on both of those situations where the client, the person I was working with most directly, also knew what was going on and was going to ask advice if it got to the media. But those can be tricky client relationships when you encounter something. I have a habit of being able to listen to the conversation at the dinner table next to me while I'm talking to you. Drove my husband nuts. But I also, on more than one occasion, went back and ratted somebody out who was talking business in an inappropriate manner in public. So that's another client issue you have to be prepared for as a consultant. What do you do when you know something that you think is detrimental to the company and you're uncertain how your client is going to react when you go blow the whistle?
Yeah.
Right. One more topic I think we have time for is whether it is valuable to have experience with an agency or a consulting firm before you go out on your own as a consultant. And Tosh, I'm going to start with you because you are a consultant in a firm, right? Do you feel like if you made the decision to go out on your own, that your experience as a consultant has prepared you for that?
Yeah, I think it has. When I went into consulting, one of their concerns is that I'd never been a consultant before. And so they initially hired me on a project contract, but I think my experience with IABC, where I really served as a consultant to my internal customers, really prepared me for being a consultant. So
Great.
That in combination with now working for a large consultancy, yes, definitely.
Yeah.
I think it's prepared me.
By the way, I absolutely hate that excuse, is that we don't want to hire you to do something because you've never done it before.
Yeah.
Reminds me of my mother not letting me drive out to a camp because I had never driven that far before on my own. I go, wait,
Yeah.
you know. What about the rest of you consulting?
I was in an agency for 8 years, and what I knew going out on my own was how to bill, what kinds of obstacles I was likely to run into, how I needed to set up expenses for things like travel, how I needed to set up contracts, how many hours I could expect to be productive billable time. And some of those constraints that I think people who go straight from a corporate role into a freelance or independent role are surprised by. They think they can bill 40 hours a week every week. And for multiple reasons, that often doesn't happen.
Yeah, and I worked for 2 HR consulting firms for a total of 13 years with the same kind of experience. I totally agree with Alice. Plus, the other thing that they give you is training and some really useful consulting skills, problem solving skills, rapport building skills, selling skills, all that stuff that you won't get the same way if you're on your own.
Proposal writing skills,
Proposal
all of those
writing,
things.
yeah.
Right. Well, we are out of time, which leaves me just enough time to tell you what's coming up on our next panel, which will be on March 18th, different time, 10 a.m. Eastern time. This is to accommodate our international participants. We've got Rajiv Kumar and Ritzi Ronquillo. Rajiv in India, Ritzi in the Philippines, along with Jim Lukashevsky and Brad Whitworth from here in the U.S. March 18th, and the topic is the role of communications in corporate social responsibility. I'm all ready to talk about that one because we're launching an initiative where I work really soon, and I'm very much involved in that. So I hope you'll all join us then to today's panel. Thank you so much. It was a great conversation. See everybody next month.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.